Let's bring you some other stories. Now we are speaking about the special tribunal which has dismissed an application by Hamilton Ndlovu to stop a further legal action against him. The SIU is trying to recoup 172 million rand from the businessman. Now it's alleged that he fraudulently awarded a tender to supply personal protective equipment, and ENCA's Ndlovu is following those proceedings and joins us now. Ndlovu, many thanks for your time this afternoon. Maybe start by talking us through some of the major arguments that have been made throughout the court proceedings today.
Well, certainly, Rapua, what we do know is that today was the judgment in that application for a stay of the tribunal proceedings that was made earlier by Hamilton Ndlovu. And of course, his arguments on why he had brought this application forward to halt the review application that is due to be heard in March next year by the Special Investigating Unit as well as the National Health Laboratory Services is basically because he claims that the curator that has been appointed to deal with his finances is simply not providing enough funds for him to be able to fight that review application by the SIU for him actually, or for that contract to be set aside and to be declared unlawful. You recall that, Rapua, the SIU in August managed to secure a preservation order against Ndlovu, essentially freezing about 42 million rand of his assets. And earlier, you recall that SARS had also had a similar preservation order against Hamilton Ndlovu, which was granted in March 2021, which essentially also froze about 60 million rand worth of his assets, which include cars as well as properties and cash. And this stems from that dodgy contract that was awarded to several companies that are linked to Hamilton Ndlovu with regards to personal protective equipment. Those contracts, we understand, were given in March 2020 last year. But since then, we understand that the SIU is now investigating corruption related to those particular contracts. And so what today was really all about was for Hamilton Ndlovu trying really to stop those proceedings, those review application of that contract, and saying that he simply does not have enough money to defend himself when that review application is heard in March next year. And so he says that if at all he does not manage to secure those funds, he will be prejudiced by that particular processes of the tribunal court, because he simply will not be able to represent himself. But also he's saying that he's asking for the court to actually halt this process, while he's also intending to bring another application before the High Court to actually review that decision by SARS to freeze some of his assets. So it is an interlocutory sort of a matter that was brought before the tribunal court, but of course it has been set aside with the court saying that it believes that it is in the interest of justice for this matter to be heard, and for the delays in this matter not to be at this particular point given any attention due to the severity of the case that he faces.
Absolute severe case indeed, Ndlovu. And just to remind our viewers, while you do that, if you could switch on your camera because we cannot see you, but some of the details that have informed the SIU that in fact that PPE contract that he secured was actually fraudulent. What is the SIU saying are some of the details that point to it being unlawfully won?
Well, Rapor, what we do understand at this particular point is that there were several contracts that were issued to about 8 companies, which are all linked to Hamilton Ndlovu. And those payments were made as part of the emergency procurement procedures for COVID-19 last year by the National Health Laboratory Services. But of course, there has been investigations that have been carried out which have pointed to the fact that there were some irregularities when it comes to the awarding of those particular contracts. And just to cite some of those, we do understand that about 7.2 million rand was paid to Hamilton Holdings, which is one of the companies, on the 31st of March 2020, as well as Abompeta, which was paid 17.4 million rand on the 24th of April. There was also a payment of 7.2 million, which was made on the 24th of April to Fellyham, which is another company that has been linked, and 17.8 million, which was paid to Mock Plus One, which is also one of the companies that has been linked to Hamilton Ndlovu. And of course, the investigations that the SIU has conducted at that particular point pointed to the fact that these were irregular contracts that were awarded, and that, in fact, from those contracts, we do understand that 152 million rand went directly to Hamilton Ndlovu's pockets, whereas only 103 million rand was garnered through that preservation order. And the 15 million that remains from those proceeds is still unaccounted for at this particular stage. And in fact, we do understand that there were several withdrawals that were made, cash withdrawals that were made, amounting to 15 million rand from that account. So there is still that amount of 50 million rand that is still not accounted for. And one of the reasons why the Tribunal Special Court then said that because Hamilton Ndlovu has failed to actually honestly disclose his finances, that's one of the reasons why he will not be granted this day of the tribunal proceedings, because up until now, we do not know what happened to that 50 million rand. Also, during his application, for this particular application, he also made mention of the fact that he was also going to ask for assistance from a third party in terms of the funding for his lawyers. But up until now, the court saying that he has not made any disclosures as to who that third party funding would come from. And so it believes that it will not be in the interest of justice for him to be allowed that stay of prosecution or the stay of proceedings in that review application, which is merely trying to recoup some of that money that was lost in that particular contract.
Very interesting insights there coming from our reporter Ndlovu about that SIU investigation.